All right, so today we have something a little different because we're not in the shop, we're not in my house, we're now outside, we're in the shed of the farm, and the reason for it is because this is the only place that has a whiteboard. And there's some things I want to talk about today, Nitro challenge for this year. I won't have my snowmobile in time, but I still want you to post what you have. If you don't have a snowmobile that's ready to run, I still want you to post it. The reason why I'm doing a video today though is to explain why Project Meteor was a success and why it was a failure. This year, for this season, I want to make a second Nitro version that improves on all the things I've done in the past snowmobile to overall have a better experience. So there's a lot of things I liked on the previous model. There's a lot of things I didn't like about it. So we're gonna try to make a list of all the things I didn't like and how to improve them. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to improve on it was the power. The reason for it is because the engine I was using is actually a 0.15 or 2.5 cubic centimeter engine. It's a Traxxas 2.5. It's not the most powerful engine there is, but it's not a bad engine. It's just that I feel like probably a 0.21 or a 3.4 cubic centimeter would be probably the best option for something of that scale. So one of the greatest way to improve performance is to increase the displacement. So let's say that we go from a 0.15, that's a cubic inch, but in my case I want something a bit bigger. Like you still have all of the same things. You will still need the carburetor, you will still need the expansion pipe, you will still need the throttle servo to make it all work, but the difference is you might as well get a bigger displacement because you will gain performance without adding too much weight or too much complexity to the system. So let's say we go from a 15 to something like a 0.36. It's still gonna take roughly the same area to have both engines of a similar size. Yes, the bigger engine will be a bit bigger, but overall in the snowmobile, it's not going to make a big difference. So the other thing I would like to improve, the exhaust pipe. The first one I did was a plastic one. It was pretty short, but the goal was to make all the curves and the bends that it requires to make it too short work. The problem though is that it's plastic, and I thought I could maybe make it work, but the temperatures of the exhaust reached such a high temperature that it just melted the exhaust. So I made a new exhaust with some copper piping, and that seemed to have worked pretty well. The only problem is that I was really limited in space, so all I could do was to make it really short. What that does is that increases the top end, but it decreases the bottom end torque. So what a snowmobile needs is a lot of torque download to get started, and once it starts and it just picks up speed, well, it's a lot easier. So what you need is download torque. Here's what I found. This is a handle that you can install in a shower, and just to give you a bit of grip. I found that in a metal dumpster at the recycling center, and it's pretty similar in size to what I would like to use. This is a constant diameter, so I would need to make my own cones to make the optimal power band. It's a bit on the small size for 0.36, but you know what? I'm satisfied with it, and if it fits inside the snowmobile, I'm all for it. The other thing I would like to have on the new snowmobile would be a 2-speed system. So one of the problems I had was because it didn't have a lot of torque because of my exhaust and because of with the small size of the engine. I was sort of limited to a very low torquey speed, which was great to get it up to speed, but like once you get to the maximum speed, you're sort of limited by the engine RPMs, which is not good. So what I would like to have is a 2-speed transmission. So what a 2-speed transmission does, well, you start in the first gear, which has more torque, and once it gets up to the RPM that it's set at, there's a little lever that gets up and catches the second gear, and it turns the second gear. And I'm gonna keep having the best power band possible to have the maximum amount of speed while retaining the initial low torque to get out of the hole and over the snow. Another thing that was a problem on my previous snowmobile is that it was a bit overcomplicated. There was lots of things, lots of wire, lots of things to look at that might be of a problem. The more things you have, the more things that can fail, right? So what I would like to have is increased simplicity. So with that being said, I'm not gonna have a remote start on the second snowmobile as I did on the first one, but I'm gonna have a pull start because it's a bit lighter as well. So I'm gonna have a pull start, I'm gonna have my glow plug igniter probably captive inside the snowmobile since you don't want to have to carry it around. The less thing you have to carry around, the best. So the glow plug igniter is gonna be part of the snowmobile. It's just gonna be a button, you push the button and it's gonna warm up the glow plug, and then you can crank it 1, 2, 3 times, however many times it takes before it starts. But I want to remove as much things as possible from the interior, things that are not all that useful, to reduce the weight and also increase the simplicity of the snowmobile. I've said it a couple times in the previous videos, but you can increase the power to have more performance, but the best way to increase performance is to reduce the weight. So in that snowmobile, I want to reduce the weight as much as possible. I'm gonna still remain with a big bore, with a big exhaust pipe, with a 2-speed transmission. But the goal is to remove as much weight as possible. And to get that, you know what I did the first time? I had my first section of the radiator of the top of the tunnel. Let's say that this is the tunnel here. So there's this, and then there's support for the wheels at the back here. Well, that section here, that section was in fact a radiator in the previous snowmobile. So there was 2 lines here and there was coolant that was looping like this, right? So all that section here was all a big chunk of 6mm aluminum. It worked amazing to keep the engine cool, right? But the problem is that all of this section here was not used. And this section was overly built, like lots of that area here was just solid aluminum. So what I would like to do is instead have one circuit that goes all the way here to the back and loops back, and then another system that goes here and loops back, because here you have the lights, the wire for the lights that are going in, and then have another system of cooling that goes like that. So that way you use the entire length of the tunnel to cool your engine. So that means you have 6 output for the tubes. So then you need to calculate how flow is going to get in between all of them, right? So reduce weight and also to a degree increase cooling, but that's not necessarily what I'm after here. So in the previous snowmobile, I had a remote start, so that means I had the motor also that's taking some of the weight. I had a big battery inside to supply the starter. Lots of little things that frankly don't really need to be there to have a good experience snowmobiling. So I'm gonna try to take as much weight of those as possible, keep it as light as possible. With a big bore, I think it's gonna have a good performance. Another thing I would like to solve was my cooling system previously. If it flipped on its side or tried to do some maneuvers, sometimes it would pick up air, and that air would sort of get trapped in the lines. Sometimes it would just not have coolant at all going in to the engine and to the rest of the system to keep it cool. So what I would like to do here this time is to have something like a swirl tank. So you've got your tank here, you've got your line going in and your line going out, but that line, instead of just going up like that, if it just made a curve to go along a cylinder like that, it's gonna make basically a little tornado inside. So all the air is gonna get all to the center here because of the force of the flow that's going around. So if your second line goes against that at a different height, all the bubbles are gonna get inside, and it doesn't matter if the snowmobile is gonna get to the side, upside down. The vortex is always gonna be at the center, and it's always gonna have water or coolant in this case on the perimeters, and hopefully that never starves. But there's one thing that's missing from the equation, and that's venting to the atmosphere, because that's gonna get build up pressure, and if it reaches 100 degrees, if you have just bare water, it's gonna want to boil. To relieve some of the pressure inside of the little vessel here again, or just tank, because it's not pressured, so you got a little tube that goes here, And then you have a one-way valve, so you've got a little ball here, and you've got O-ring here at the top. It's all encapsulated inside of a little chamber here. So if it flips backward, the little ball is going to get up against the O-ring and it's going to seal, so no leaks. But all the time that it's running upright, air can just flow on both sides of the O-ring, and it doesn't get caught up. But that still means that there's a possibility that if it's not fully sealed, there might be a leak, right? So to solve that, I'm gonna do the same thing that I've done for Decagon, and it's to have a closed loop system. So there's no vent, but the stuff that I'm gonna use is called Evan waterless coolant. That stuff does not take expansion nearly as much as water or coolant. So my system is gonna be 100% sealed. I might have to do a little bump inside to give a relief point, so this reservoir is made of plastic, so it might deform a little bit, ever so slightly. We're talking maybe 5% expansion over the entire amount of liquid that's inside the loop. But I'm thinking there might be 40 milliliter inside the entire loop, perhaps. So 5% of 40 is basically nothing. It shouldn't even deform this. But worst case scenario, this little flexible plastic with heat is just going to deform a bit, and therefore I won't need a vent tube to go outside to the atmosphere. So that is waterless coolant. There you go. So this is my plan of attack to hopefully have the best possible remote control snowmobile that's Nitro powered. I'm still gonna have the long track, long skid. It's still gonna be G4, but hopefully with these points, it's gonna be such a more enjoyable snowmobile. It's gonna have heaps of power. It's gonna be hopefully a bit more reliable, and hopefully it's just gonna be a blast to drive around. So, and since we are Christmas Day today, well, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And with that being said, thanks for riding with me.